Everything is changing around us. Old political divisions are shifting. Technology has torn down barriers. And across the globe, power is returning to the people. From outside the Beltway, you get a different perspective. The age of elitism is coming to an end. I've seen it up close. From inside government, while running campaigns, and starting my own business. People are looking for a new brand of change. And the place for positive populism is here. The next revolution starts right now. Live from Los Angeles tonight, the next revolution will be televised. The elite say America's at full employment. Really? So how come so many Americans can't find work? We'll investigate. Plus, election shock in Britain. Is it the end of populism? And what will it mean for the US? Tonight, I'll have the answers as I turn the tables on my panel. You don't want to miss that. And later, the Green lobby has me seeing red. In this week's Swamp Watch, you won't believe how dirty some clean groups really are. Evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Steve Hilton. In a moment, we'll talk about the week's big news, the Comey hearings in Washington. But I want to start with something we'd planned to do in our first show last week. Tell you why we called this show The Next Revolution. Donald Trump's election, the Brexit vote in the UK, populist movements growing around the world. This is a time of revolution, and we want to explain what's coming next. But also what should come next, because I am not an impartial observer. I believe that for too long, we've been ruled by a failed elitism that put the interests and obsessions of the rich ahead of the needs of working people. Power was concentrated in the hands of big government and big business. We've seen a collapse in economic security and opportunity. Incomes went down and jobs went away. Elitism also helped tear apart our social fabric, the ties of family and community. We all know that's true. Today's populist movement is the response to decades of elitism's failure. Just take a look at this chart. I think it explains the populist revolution better than anything else. It shows what happened to incomes under the last two presidents. After 8 years of Bush and 8 years of Obama, the rich got richer and half the country got poorer. Now, it's time to focus on the positive difference that populism can make. And that is our agenda on this show, to be the home of positive populism. We will hold Washington, Congress, and the Trump administration to account for delivering the populist revolution that you voted for. Along the way, we might upset a few ideologues on the left and the right, because positive populism is not ideological, it is practical. And that's why I was so dismayed by what we saw in Washington this week with the Comey hearings. Yes, of course, it's true that we were attacked by Russia, but we don't need more investigation, we need retaliation. Washington's obsession with scandal is truly decadent. In decadent DC, they're doing fine, so they assume that everyone else is too. But for so many Americans, the reality is grim. It's a struggle to find work, and even if you have a job, it's a struggle to live on what you earn. That is what DC should be focused on, as we will be on this show. In ancient Rome, the elite distracted the people with bread and circuses. In today's decadent DC, presiding over decades of economic failure, they can't even get the bread part right. It's all just a circus. Right, let's get into all that. Joining me tonight is our panel. Former Nevada Assemblywoman and Bernie Sanders supporter, Lucy Flores. Politico senior writer, co-author of Playbook. That's the thing you need to read every single morning to understand what's going on in DC. Jake Sherman. And, of course, we are so excited she's come all the way across the country to be with us tonight. Co-host of The Five, Kimberly Guilfoyle. So, Jake, I want to start with you. I would never call you decadent, but you
I do live in DC.
Yes, you do live in DC, and you really know what's going on there. What I'd love you to try and explain is not the sort of back and forth of the Comey hearings. We've heard a lot about that. What I'm genuinely interested in, and I think our viewers are, when they see all this going on, and they have all these problems, and they just see this circus. Why? Why do you think they seem so obsessed in D.C., the politicians and all the kind of people around them, with talking about scandals rather than getting on with things that affect real people's lives? What's behind that? So my father told me when I was young, and he's proven right, that politicians want to get power, keep power, and increase power. And I think that this is a way, a bipartisan way, for Republicans and Democrats to score points. But I think even deeper what we're seeing is we're seeing the political class, and I don't mean that by individuals, but the political system rebel against a person who's the president, but acts like he's in private business. What he did, what he told the FBI director, James Comey, and what James Comey has testified under oath, is that he wanted him to back off of an investigation into one of his former advisors. In business, when you're in a private company that you own, you could do things like that, and it's perfectly acceptable. In Washington, that's proven to be a big problem for Donald Trump and something that's not going away. So I think this is a chance for Republicans and Democrats to take some whacks within a context, within a system that has not allowed for this kind of behavior in the past. That's really, so you think it's kind of revenge for the election? I don't think it's revenge for the election. Anti-establishment vote. I don't think it's revenge for the election. I do think that politicians are now working within a certain set of political realities, and you're seeing them react in kind. You're seeing them, Donald Trump is the president. People are getting used to that. But I think this kind of, this reaction would have happened under any president. I just don't think any other president would have done what the president did to James Comey. So, Kimberly, I mean, we talk about this all the time on the channel, that people just, they're sick of hearing about this. They want to, we keep saying over and over again, when are we going to get to tax reform? When are we going to get to the real things? But some of it is, I mean, Jake's making a few good points. I mean, some of it is self-inflicted, isn't it?
Well, of course it is. But I see this, it is a politics of personal destruction. But I also feel that it's really a big response to the election, to the populism and the movement that Donald Trump brought forward in this country. And I think people still can't get over the election results. And this is the way to say, you know what, not on our watch. We're going to put this forward. We're going to hold you accountable. And in fact, blocking, and there's people from both sides. Some Republicans didn't support him, independents, Democrats. It's a mixed bag of people coalescing together to try and obstruct, to try to put roadblocks in the way so that these policies and these principles aren't put forward. And I see it. It's tear-down politics. It's grossly distracting. It's a disservice to the country because it's not moving us forward with the economy or jobs. We're getting mired down in all of this, and then you can't get anything accomplished. I mean, you saw this with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Right? He was doing well with the economy, then these hearings came forward, and we become obsessed with the process and who can tear the next person down. So if you're scratching forward with some ideas and some innovation, who's trying to pull you back, by your heels or by your ankles? And it's frustrating to me to watch because they want to have hearings about hearings. And instead
this is the thing I find. It's just this endless, focus on the process and so on. But Lucy, something about this that I find interesting is where, the politics of this for the Democrats. So pretty much straight after the election, before we got into all this scandal, there seemed to be a debate going on in the Democratic Party after Hillary Clinton's defeat, which was, should we focus on economic populism, the kind of Bernie Sanders message, or should we focus on the kind of identity politics that many people said that Hillary Clinton spent too much time talking about? That was the debate. It feels like today, it's more, should we be talking about the economic populism, those issues, or versus Russia? Do you think that, I mean, it seems to me that that is where a lot of the Democratic Party is. They actually really enjoy talking about all this scandal.
Well, look, ultimately, it is a distraction. And look, no one wants to admit that they screwed up, that it was largely the Democratic Party and their candidates' fault for losing against someone like Donald Trump. And rather than just admit that and talk about the things that went wrong, it's a lot easier to continue focusing on the boogeyman, whatever boogeyman form that might take. And clearly that's been Russia, and now it's Comey. I think you do have a lot of people. I mean, now you saw a contested election for the Democratic chairmanship. Half of that vote went to Keith Ellison, the other half went to Tom Perez. Tom barely eked that out. So you are seeing that there's more of, I'm on the Unity Commission for the DNC, appointed by Bernie Sanders. And so you are seeing more of a focus on what I believe is the mandate from the American people, which is talk about us. Don't talk about Russia. And so I do see that there's some movement there. But yes, of course, you're always going to default back to what's the easiest. And that easiest...
I think you nailed it. I think that's right. I think it's because it's easy to do all this stuff.
That's right.
We've got to go in a second, but Jake, last word to you. Do you think that... Is there any end to this? Is this going to be the story for the next, 3.5 years?
It's dangerous because I'm sitting between two people. I'm going to disagree with them slightly. I think Congress's responsibility is oversight, but it's also legislating.
Okay.
So I think that the problems in getting Trump's agenda through have nothing to do with the Russia issue. They have to do with some fundamental intra-party problems he has with Republicans.
Also a very good point, and we're going to get into a lot of that on this show as we get into those issues. But I'm going to
KGB fever.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
They can't let go of it. Yeah.
We have to take a break now, but coming up later, this week's Swamp Watch, which a lot of people loved from last week, we're going to be doing it every week, puts a target on the Green Lobby. We expose the cronyism among people who claim to put the environment first. That's ahead. And next, did the populist movement take a big hit in the UK this week? And what does it mean for the US? It's only our second show, but I have a surprise in store for the panel when we discuss this one. The next revolution is underway. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Steve Hilton. Now, you may have noticed there was an election last week in the UK, and it didn't go so well for Prime Minister Theresa May, who lost her majority. There was one piece of good news. Our exclusive interviewee from last week, you'll remember Michael Gove, who talked so brilliantly about the threat from Islamist terror. Just tonight, he was appointed to the cabinet by Theresa May. See, you come on this show, you get promoted. It's a warning for all of you, or a promise. What does it all mean for Brexit, for populism, and for politics in this country? Now, as some of you may have seen over the past few days, the person that we normally get to talk about all this stuff is me. But interviewing myself would be a little weird. So instead, we're going to flip the panel, and they get to ask the questions. So here we go. Let's start with you, Kimberly.
So this is a question I've been getting a lot this week, so you're the perfect person to answer it, is, what does this outcome mean for Brexit?
Well, I'm very glad you asked me that. I think that actually it means potentially quite a lot. This election result, it wasn't a mandate in any direction on Brexit. Theresa May wanted a mandate for her version of Brexit, which was a clean break, what they describe as hard Brexit. You leave the EU, you don't have European law in charge of British law, and you have control over your borders. Others have been arguing for a soft Brexit, which is a more mild version. Actually, no one comes out of this with a mandate for what they want, and so she's going to be vulnerable to all sorts of people who are saying, you didn't get what you put forward, let's argue about it, let's go back to the drawing board. And so I think actually it could really mess up the whole process, which was what she wanted to be heading in a strong, clear direction.
Sure.
This could delay the whole thing, it could water it down. It's a really big deal, I think.
Yeah, quite problematic.
Sounds like a miscalculation. Was this a vote?
Yeah, one of the biggest you've ever seen in politics.
Was this a vote for or against populism?
Well, I think that a lot of people here actually, I've seen this said actually, that this was a rejection of populism because of the Brexit angle. But actually, if you look at what happened, the Labour Party candidate, Theresa May's opponent, Jeremy Corbyn, he ran on a really populist platform. I think this vote was yet again a rejection of establishment politics on the Labour Party side, the equivalent of the Democrats. You had the establishment Labour people laughing at Jeremy Corbyn. They couldn't wait to see his massive defeat so that they could reassert the kind of centrist establishment left politics that they had thought he should have followed. But instead, that was completely rejected, and he got one of the biggest Labour votes for years. So I think it's actually another version of populism, but this time from the left.
Yep, absolutely. So bringing it back home, then what are the implications on American politics?
Well, I think that, well, I mean, let's just talk about the Democrats first. I think that there's a real lesson here. I mean, I don't know, it feels like you might agree, which is that if you want to win or do well, you should run a populist candidate, not an establishment candidate. I felt like this election, in a way, the parallel was really with the Democratic primary, where you had an economic populist, Corbyn, the equivalent of Bernie Sanders, and an establishment person, Theresa May, in a way a bit like Hillary Clinton. And so thinking about 2018 and 2020, I think the Democrats really need to think about that, because that's what really got people going.
Absolutely.
That's what really galvanized people. And actually, that's also a lesson for the Republicans, because what happened in the UK was, and actually one of the real reasons that Corbyn did so well, the Labour Party did so well, was you had this, and actually it's good news, you had a real resurgence of the youth vote. Young people turned out to vote, and that's just a great thing, whatever the outcome, because we want to see more people participating, and he inspired young people. And so the Republicans here, I think, need to really watch out for that, because with the election of Donald Trump, and in response to that, young people getting more engaged in politics, that's a real warning. I don't know. I think actually there are some lessons. What do you think for the Democrats?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. It was really interesting to watch social media and the reaction on social media to this election, where the commentary on the outcome was followed by Bernie would have won.
Right.
So, you know, I think that's a very real implication on what people are feeling, and frankly, the frustrations that have led us to here. I mean, we opened up the show by talking about the economy and who has gained under two different parties leading this country, and it has not been the everyday people. And I believe there was something like 70 to 80% turnout of young people in this election, and that's just incredible. Imagine if that was the turnout every single election in the United States. I frankly think that Republicans would have a real problem.
I just wanted to get Kimberly's take on it, because that, you know, sort of owning that populist agenda, you know, that's a really big prize, isn't it? And in the last election, in the end, in the general, it was more Trump that really, and the Republicans, by extension, that got it. But they can't count on that next time.
They can't count on it. You cannot take it for granted. I think this really put them on their heels when you're watching this, just, you know, globally. And it's fascinating to me to see, because nobody has ownership by label of the populist message. And you were talking about this week. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's not belonging to one ideology in particular. It's about this positive populism, like you said, and being able to garner that kind of support. And the party that's able to bring in the youth like this, and this is why I think this bodes well for Bernie Sanders and a lot of his supporters and the people that were disappointed by the campaign of Hillary Clinton. If you can get that in and you can speak to them and relate, then that's harnessing a tremendous amount of voting potential and a block that could shift to either side depending on who speaks their language and connects with them and doesn't take it for granted.
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry, We're not going to have time. You can hold that thought for a bit later in the show. I know you will be, because we have to go to a break. But when we come back, there's going to be a real revolutionary that you're going to meet tonight. The man who wants to change the face of education in America. And he just may do it. That's ahead. But next, Russia, Mike Flynn, Jim Comey. Why isn't America talking about the real issue facing this country? We'll break down the jobs crisis next. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton. Here's what decadent DC should be focused on: jobs, incomes, your life. The elite seem to think we now have full employment in this country, that pretty much everyone who wants a job can get one. Is that true? And what does the future hold? Is everyone really going to be put out of work by a robot? To help us understand what's happening, I am so pleased to be joined by one of the world's top experts on employment and technology, and that is not an exaggeration. MIT professor and co-author of the brilliant book, The Second Machine Age, Eric Brynjolfsson. Eric, there's so much to explore in this, but I just wanted to start with that pretty specific point about full employment. The numbers came out recently. Very low unemployment rate, 4.3%. There was this talk of full employment. At the same time as we hear that there's full employment, we hear about communities in crisis, people not being able to find a job. How does that make sense? What's behind that discrepancy?
Well, you're right. Unemployment is pretty low right now, 4.3%. And many other indicators of the economy are doing great. GDP's at record high. We have more millionaires and billionaires than ever in history. But there are a lot of people who aren't benefiting or sharing in that growth. If you look at some other stats, like labor force participation, the share of people who are working, that's near a 30-year low, down around 62%. In fact, it fell even as unemployment was going up. median income is stagnating. More than half the people in the country aren't seeing their incomes grow. So right now, it's actually lower than it was in the late 1990s. So it seems like a puzzle. We're having more growth than ever before, but a lot of people are not participating. They're being left behind, and that's because it's becoming more and more unequal.
So what's your diagnosis? I mean, in this debate that I think not having enough of, but in the debate to the extent that we're having it, some people blame globalization, others blame technology and automation. I mean, you're literally one of the world's experts. What's your diagnosis of what's going on? And
well, this is,
actually
I think,
what the future might hold.
I'm glad you brought this up. And this is, I think, the biggest challenge for our society and our economy today and really over the next decade is how we're going to deal with these wrenching changes that are happening. And most of them are being driven by technology. Globalization certainly plays a part, but in the long run, it's not even close. The big shifts are being caused by some real changes in the technology, not just robots, but more broadly, digitization of the economy. And that's automating a lot of routine information processing work, a lot of the work that people with high school educations used to do. And more, things like truck driving, I think, are going to be in the bullseye going forward. That's going to dislocate a lot of people. We need to create enough new jobs so that those people can have new things to do. And I don't think we're doing it effectively right now.
So has that happened before? I mean, when we've had these waves of technological change, has it been the case that, I mean, I'm thinking back to, a century or more ago when lots of people were working in agriculture, literally in the fields, and that's
right.
changed. Big changes have happened in the past. Have we managed to adjust well before, and are there any lessons from that for what we should do this time around?
Well, there are some similarities, and one of the reasons that Andy McAfee and I called the book The Second Machine Age was to harken back to the first Industrial Revolution, started over in England, where upwards of 90% of people in America, Britain, elsewhere were working in farms, and now, of course, it's less than about 2%. So all those people didn't just become unemployed, we redeployed them. In America, we invented the concept of mass public education to give people the skills so they could work in other areas. That time, that spanned over a couple of centuries. Now we're looking at a couple of decades, so it's a much more rapid transition. There are a lot more jobs being affected because it's affecting all sorts of information processing work, not just manual labor. So it's a much broader, faster, and deeper transition. But there are some good lessons that if we adapt to it as individuals, as organizations, and in our government, I think we will be able to make this transition, and it could be, and it should be, good news for almost everybody.
Well, I've got some thoughts which I'll share at the end of the show on some of the specifics that we can do to help bring that about. I just wanted to see if our panel has any thoughts or questions for Eric. Jake, do you want to go first?
Eric, I wonder, Washington is notoriously slow to adapt to almost any change in the economy and basically anything. I wonder if you could give us some specifics about what Washington could do to facilitate some of these changes in our economy and in our workforce.
Well, it starts with recognizing the issue and the opportunity and the problem. I mean, as I mentioned, we're creating enormous amounts of wealth. I mean, there's more wealth in our country than ever before in history. So that's the good news, and it means we have more capabilities. But we have to understand that there's some big fundamental changes going on. And I think the big picture is to think about how we can embrace the future. We can't hold back this change. We wouldn't want to hold back this change. And this attitude of trying to freeze in place some of the old jobs or some of the old ways of doing things, I think is a really destructive mindset. A more appropriate mindset would be to how do we reskill people for the new kinds of jobs? How do we encourage entrepreneurship so new products, services, and industries get invented? How do we change our tax policy to adapt to this new society? But ultimately, it's going to be disruptive, it's going to be wrenching, and simply freezing in place the existing system is never going to work.
Kimberly, it sounded like you agreed with a lot of that.
Yeah, I really do. And then I've also seen a lot of the research in Silicon Valley, billionaires talking about offsetting some of this, progression of automation with robots and AI, which I agree, we need that to come as well. You can't stop it because it's coming. But what about this guaranteed universal income and adopting sort of an idea of socialism? Because for me, I feel that that really dampens the capitalist free market spirit to encourage entrepreneurs like the Steve Jobs of the future from coming forward?
Right. You know, it's not really just a socialist idea. I mean, Milton Friedman was one of the people who advocated it. I'm personally not a big fan of it right now because I see that there's so much work that can only be done by people. And so it's a little premature to be saying, let's kick back and have robots do all the work and we can just have our guaranteed income. Maybe someday, maybe in 50 years, I'm not sure when. Right now, there's so much work to be done in healthcare, in education, in cleaning the environment, and in helping people that only humans can do, that robots can't do. So I'm much more of a fan of something that Paul Ryan and Barack Obama agreed on, which was the Earned Income Tax Credit. I'm hoping that we'll see that in the new tax reform, a broadening of the Earned Income Tax Credit. That is, I think you know, is a policy that encourages people to work. It tops off their incomes with additional support, and that way you're able to get dampen some of the effects of income inequality that's been growing quite a bit, but still encourage people to stay in the workforce. And it implicitly also encourages employers to hire more people.
Yeah,
Eric,
great.
thank you so much. Lucy, I'm sorry we don't have time for your thoughts on this, but I just want to thank Eric for joining us. What a great perspective, and I hope we can have you back another time. There's so much to talk about in this whole area. It's just so central to everything that matters.
Always a pleasure. I'm glad you're addressing it.
Thank you, Eric. Good to see you. Swamp Watch, when we come back, takes aim at the EPA and the Green Lobby. But next, I'll introduce you to a true education revolutionary who's looking to change the way our children learn. Eric spoke about it just now. Don't miss this. This week's revolutionary idea. There's an education revolution happening in this country, and one of the people leading it is Sal Khan. Now, you might recognize that name from his online education site, Khan Academy. It started with wildly popular math and science videos, and then expanded into an interactive learning platform that's now used by teachers and students right across America. But he didn't stop there. Sal Khan wants to change the way students are taught in the classroom. He founded a school in the heart of Silicon Valley that is reinventing education for the 21st century. I've seen it up close. My children are students at the Khan Lab School. I sat down with Sal Khan to bring you the story. So Sal, your background is in finance originally, and then you're an entrepreneur and you created Khan Academy. But most recently, you actually chose to start a real physical school, one in fact that both our respective children go to. What made you do that? Why did you want to start a real school in the real world?
Well, secretly, you know, back in the day when I was an engineer and then worked in finance, I would say, well, let me one day start a school. I could be like a Dumbledore figure. I figured that would just be a good way to grow old. But as Khan Academy got off the ground, you know, we're this not-for-profit. We're reaching tens of millions of students every month. They're using us in the classroom, outside of the classroom. But how could that change the actual architecture of a school? Well, if students are getting explanations at their own time and pace, if they're getting problems, and if teachers are getting data on where every student is, it liberates the classroom. Now, students don't have to give a one-pace-fits-all lecture to everyone. You don't have to separate students by perceived ability. You don't have to separate them by age. And so all of these things start happening, and I've written and I speak all the time about it. But we realize unless we create some proof points, the world might not change over the next 10, 20, 30 years, even though tools like Khan Academy exist. So the whole point of the lab school that we created downstairs from Khan Academy is to be one of these proof points.
If you think about the schools that our viewers would send their children to, that they themselves attended, that most people in America experience in terms of education, it's pretty much, you know, one type of school system. You've got good schools and bad schools and middling schools, but you think there's something wrong with the whole system, something more fundamental. What is wrong with the way we think about education in America today?
What happened in traditional schools for the last 200 and something years, including the schools that most of us grew up in, is you group students together, initially by age and around middle school age and perceived ability, and you move them together at a set pace. And what typically happens, let's say we're in a middle school pre-algebra class, teacher gives us a lecture on exponents, Some of us get it, some of us don't.
I definitely don't. That's just my personal experience.
You've done all right. and you have lecture homework. It continues for a week or two, then you get a test. And on that test, maybe I get a 70%, maybe you get an 80%, maybe someone else gets a 95%. Even though that test has identified gaps, I didn't know 30% of the material, we all move on to the next concept, and that those gaps are just used to judge me. And that next concept might be something like logarithms or negative exponents, something that builds on those gaps.
So let's just say we could wave a wand, put you in charge, your education secretary in America. What is Sal Khan's education revolution? What does that look like? How do you want to change things?
Our modern school system, you kind of have to sit in a chair for a year, and if you do all right, they'll probably promote you to the next year, even if you don't know a lot of the concepts. In the college system, we actually use something called credit hours, which is actually a measure of seat time, how much time you should be doing things, and instead move to a competency-based system. Regardless of whether it took you a month to learn algebra or whether it took you to learn 3 years to learn algebra, do you know algebra? And so what I would do is I'd create a series of ways for people to prove at any age that, hey, I know my algebra, I know my biology. Because in a seat time system that we have today, students keep getting promoted, and then they graduate, oftentimes not knowing their core skills.
So does that mean that, for example, you know that whole notion of grades, you move up 1 grade every year, would you get rid of that?
I would get rid of the notion of grades as a judgment on who you are. I would also get rid of the notion of grades in terms of your level of, in some schools it's grades are equated with what you should be learning, what subject matter, it's equated with your age. But we all know we all develop our maturity at different levels. Some of us might be ready to race ahead in English, but might need to spend a little bit more time on the math or the science, or vice versa. So that by the time they're in middle school and high school, a lot of these students, and we're seeing it here, not only are they able to take ownership of themselves, but they're able to help their peers. And if you think about the jobs of the future, frankly, the jobs of today, who do you want to hire? Yes, it's very important for someone to know their algebra and to have good reading comprehension, to be able to write well. But it's arguably just as important that they know how to set goals, that they know how to pace themselves, that they know how to work with others, that they could be a mentor, that they can be a communicator.
So I just want to ask you about that a bit more, because I think a lot of people hearing this will think, well, this all sounds very nice, it's progressive, let's rethink education and put the students in charge, that's all very well, but in the end, how does it help my kid get a job? There are people who are just really worried about what's going to happen to their families, and how does any of this help in a practical way for people watching tonight?
So there's something interesting that's always happened in the education world. There's been this debate between the progressives and the traditionalists. And the traditionalists are like, you've got to know your multiplication tables, you've got to know X, Y, and Z, while the progressives said, no, we should give a little bit more freedom, the kids could work on more projects. What we're saying is actually both. We're actually quite traditional that students should really master a lot of the core concepts, arguably at a higher threshold than what happens in the traditional system. But we're also saying with the aid of technology, you can give the students a lot more ownership so they can get these meta skills that are going to be super important in the 21st century.
The Green Lobby, that's the focus of our weekly Swamp Watch. Next.